This is amazing, man. This has gone from chaos to a disaster. And I didn't think it would get to this point. You got the whole world talking about this thing. It's amazing to see what has become of this franchise. And it's only week 5.
Okay, so our friend Tom Pelissero just tweeting this out a few minutes ago. Vikings fined wide receiver Stefon Diggs. Now, that must be the punishment that Mike Zimmer referred to. He said, quote, "We already punished him." So this must be what that is, that he was fined. And Pelissero reports that this was not the first time Diggs missed a meeting this season, and that he also says a lot of players get fined for things during the season, which is very much true. A lot of stuff that gets kept sort of behind the scenes. Of course, this was not really public to skip practice and then come out and say there's truth to rumors and things like that. So, all right. Well, where do we go from here, Myron? Can we just assume that Stefon Diggs is not going to be suspended for a game because he decided to do this?
Yeah, I mean, that feels safe. But I think the bigger question is what happens if they lose Sunday? And just does this go from just disaster to someone losing their job? Because I think like the fact that this has become a national story has to really bother the folks who are part of this organization. I do a Sunday show, a national show through ESPN Radio every Sunday, countdown to kickoff, and we did it through in Bristol last Sunday. So when you do that show, after the show, you go into what we call the war room to watch games. And there's like 20 TVs, and it's, Rex Ryan and Chris Berman and Louis Riddick and all these ESPN guys, Randy Moss. And you're just watching games for hours and hours and hours. And to hear the way they talked about the Vikings, you could tell that there is this sense, at least nationally, that not only is something going wrong in Minnesota, Kyler, but that's something that might not be able to be fixed by the people who are in charge of this organization. No one thinks that Kirk Cousins is going to improve. I think he is what he is. And now that you have guys who are disgruntled and upset, I think that could turn this into an even more problematic situation.
First, if anyone gets the reference, I want to say there's no fighting in the war room. If anyone gets that reference, please tweet me. Okay, so you're in the war room, Myron. You're watching the game with a bunch of people who analyze the NFL at large. I'm in the locker room talking to these players and coaches and everything else and sort of seeing this progress. Did people nationally expect this to happen from the Vikings, that we would be 4 weeks into the season talking about the potential of this thing completely collapsing? Because I can tell you from my perspective, my expectation was that they would hit some bumps in the road here and that we would see a lot of the same Kirk Cousins that we always saw, but that the offensive system was going to be better designed. They would hit some big plays down the field, that Dalvin Cook would run more successfully. Like, I thought that they could be 2-2 at this point. I kind of expected 3-1. What I did not necessarily expect is Adam Thielen to be pointing the finger at the media and for Stefon Diggs to not be showing up to practice. There was conversations that we had about the potential for Stefon Diggs to be unhappy because we got that sense from him going back to August, just by his demeanor, the way he acted on the practice field and skipping a couple of OTAs and giving very vague explanations and things like that. So there had been a little smoke around it, but I never would have expected that we could get to this place this fast.
Yeah, I mean, a big difference between smoke and a wildfire, right? And I think that's what this has kind of become. I mean, the folks I talked to naturally thought that this was a team a year ago that, they win 8 games. They got a shot at the playoffs. Things go differently in Green Bay. It's a different situation. And I think they figured, especially how much respect a lot of people have for Gary Kubiak, that this thing would not necessarily dramatically turn around, but they'd catch some of the breaks they didn't get a year ago, and they could possibly be a playoff team. They can still be a playoff team, but now it's the other drama. What I didn't hear, Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, I listened to Thielen, and I don't want to hear what Thielen said days after his post-game comments. That's what I'm going to focus on. We heard what you said after the game. We heard what you said last year. We know that this isn't a good situation or environment. I have not heard people coming out and standing up and saying, no, my dude's going to be all right. That quarterback's going to be okay.
Sure.
We're going to be fine. I have not heard that. I grew up around Green Bay Packers football in the 90s when Brett Favre would throw 4 picks in a game. And even though he had moments where you could tell that clearly it was his fault that they lost some of these games, just him forcing things, being reckless, the commitment to him and his potential and what they believed in him and his what he could do, that never wavered. Guys always came out and Brett was their dude. I haven't heard that, Colin, with Kirk Cousins. No one's convinced me that they believe Kirk Cousins is going to lead them to anything. And that, to me, is the most concerning element of all this. It's Diggs now, but who else is it next week and 2 weeks from now and 3 weeks from now? How can the Vikings do this and deal with this without making some sort of significant change internally?
Well, it's a great point because it ends up making everyone, including the players, I'm sure the coaches, the front office, and the fan base all feel stuck with this. And that would be, I guess, the factor if Stefon Diggs wasn't already thrilled that pushed him over the side of the edge with this team is that feeling that it just cannot change at the quarterback position, no matter how much you alter the scheme. Now, no matter how much talent you bring in with two elite receivers and elite running back, now you have two tight ends who can catch the football, and you still can't make things happen in the passing game. You still can't go on the road and win an NFC North battle, even when your defense in those two games allows 21 and 16. I mean, that should be very
Yeah.
winnable for you with that amount of talent. I mean, I've talked about how, the rookie center is struggling, but there are some times where I want to even stop myself and be like, really, man? I mean, I know he's not doing well, but like that's what we're talking about with an offense that has this much talent that's going to be the excuse is the rookie center isn't playing very well. It shouldn't be. It all points back to the quarterback position. I mean, if they had, like you said, a Brett Favre at that position, I don't think this would be an issue. I even think, Myron, if Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback or Case Keenum, that this isn't an issue either because at very least you have the quarterback that everybody likes. I
Yeah.
mean, if Adam Thielen can say whatever the hell Adam Thielen wants to say, but on week 17, when you stand on that sideline and put your hands on your hips and look up toward the rafters while your quarterback is yelling at you, showing no respect for him whatsoever, you're not going to say a thing that's going to make me believe that you and the quarterback are on great terms either. No
Yeah.
matter who you come out and blame and say it's the national media, it's this, that, or the other thing. Sorry, buddy, you kind of showed your cards there. And I'm going to
Yeah.
believe what I see rather than what you say. And then in week 3 there, where he basically after the game says, yeah, or week 4, I'm sorry, we're frustrated and things like that. I mean, I'm going to believe the instant reaction and
Yep.
not the attempt to sort of cover it up later. And now, how can you solve this? Well, there isn't a trust or belief that it's going to change or that it's going to get better. I mean, I grew up in Buffalo with the bickering Bills where Jim Kelly was not the most friendly guy in a very friendly city, Myron.
Yeah.
And those guys yelled at each other and they fought and everything else. But you know what? They always knew at the end of the day that they had a Hall of Fame quarterback on their hands and he was going to be the guy. It does not feel like there's a respect factor here. It doesn't feel like there's a guy in charge at the quarterback position who could say, guys, get over it. Let's go. Put your egos aside. We can take this thing and win. It just doesn't feel like anyone is going to believe that message if he's even trying to give it out. Because on Wednesday, Myron, he's like, well, when you throw 10 passes, sorry, you can't get 18 catches. And it's like, dude,
Come
stop.
on, man.
Like, stop.
Come on.
Everything you say makes this worse.
Well, and they're terrible at trying to spin the narrative, right? This is not a franchise that's really good at that. They've never been good at that. When they try to change the narrative, they make things worse. But I tell you what, man, if this happens in Chicago, I don't think it becomes this public issue because your Khalil Max and guys inside that organization would deal with this. I can guarantee you it ain't happening in Green Bay. There are a lot of teams where you go, of course there are disgruntled players, man. That's the NFL. Like even winning teams have guys who wish they got the ball more and they're just frustrated with the way things are going. But for this to become this public fire where it doesn't seem like anyone can lead, because I'll tell you what, a young dude like Stefon Diggs, he needs a veteran in that locker room, a JJ Watt, a Khalil Mack, someone who can pull him aside and go, hey, brother, we don't do this. I understand you're mad, but this is not how we do it. And the reality is, you act the way that Stefon Diggs is acting right now, well, you just don't respect the organization. You don't respect its direction. This guy signed a 5-year, $81 million deal when he thought he was going into the prime of his career with a team that loved to pass the ball and was going to improve from the team that we saw get to the NFC title game. Now he's on a team that is really a running team, right, Colin? I mean, the Vikings are a running team. So now you're seeing fewer opportunities if you're Diggs to do what you were paid to do, and you're going, did I just give away the prime of my career? Stefon Diggs, to me, sounds like and is acting like a young person, a young player in this league who feels stuck, who feels like I just signed a deal in the most important years of my career to play with a team that is not even using us the way that I thought they would. We're not winning. We might not be a playoff team, and it's frustrating. My question is, it's Stefon Diggs now. Who is it in week 6 and 7 and week 8 and 9? Like, this is week 5, and we have this drama. What happens by week 8 if this team isn't a playoff team? Does the whole thing just implode? Because I think at some point, and I'm not saying it's Mike Zimmer, but if this team loses Sunday to the former offensive coordinator of this team, someone gets fired Monday, because you have to do that in the NFL in order to show that you're at least trying to do things differently. If they lose Sunday on the road to the Giants, someone's getting fired Monday.
Okay, that's a nice blazing take, and I want to get back to that in just a second, but I do want to say that it is interesting you brought up Khalil Mack in Chicago and how a defensive player would sort of be in charge of that franchise. And with this team, there isn't that feeling. The defensive guys are very close with each other. I mean, they seem to be like best friends. Barr and Kendricks, have played together for so long, and Everson and Daniil and these guys. I mean, it's the same defense that has been here basically the entire time with Mike Zimmer, and they're the ones who sign contracts and come back to play. And Anthony Barr is in tears thinking about playing anywhere else because he loves being around these guys. And yet it feels like the other side of the room just could not be more the opposite. You've got one receiver saying more or less, I'm frustrated, let me out of this. You got another receiver saying, well, it's all the media spin, but realistically showing just as much irritation. You have a tight end who's now decided that he's the greatest blocker in history. I mean, that was the best part of the other day was Kyle Rudolph being, I don't know, guys, I just love this blocking assignment. Like I love showing you guys I can block. We're like, is this really happening right now? You got an offensive line that is almost as bad outside of Brian O'Neill as it's always been. And so it's like one side is as solidified and has its leadership and sort of its structure and everything else and all of its pieces and it's sort of its own little culture. And then the other side of the room, I mean, it's like the defense is the dog inside the fire, right? Oh, this is fine. Like we're doing all right, but everything else is burning down around us. And so that kind of brings me back to what you said about going to New York, because each year this team seems to have one of those games, aside from 2017, which is just a totally different scenario from all the other Zimmer years, but all the other Zimmer years have one game where they should absolutely win and they just don't show up at all. And with all the things going on around this team right now, this one has that feeling. And going to 2-3 on a team that's supposed to compete for the Super Bowl in a division that is maybe the toughest from top to bottom in the entire NFL. Yeah. I'm not sure that someone's fired, but I definitely couldn't count it out, considering that the locker room seems to be falling apart. And you have to ask yourself, and Alex Boone said this yesterday, you have to ask yourself, well, what role do the coaches play in all of this, the coaching staff? And how many times with Mike Zimmer will we have this same story being written of, well, outside of when Shermer was here, who's a head coach now, it's like, well, you can't get the offense right in 2015. You can't get the offense right in 2016 and a coordinator leaves. You can't get it right in 2018 and you fire a coordinator. And now here we are in 2019 with all sorts of talent and you still can't get it right. And I mean, you can only point the finger at the quarterback so much. He's going to be here this year and next year either way, right? I mean, at some point you're right that it has to get pointed, that finger of frustration somewhere else other than just, hey, it's Kirk Cousins' fault.
Yeah, and to me, we know the problems with this team. They're ongoing. You do need someone from the top to come in and fix it. But what's clear, Kyler, Zimmer can't fix it. If he could fix it, he would have fixed it already, right? At the end of the day, this team is stuck with some deficiencies that they're going to have to find a way to overcome. I just think the Diggs situation to me is alarming at this point in the season. The whole, are the trade rumors true or not? Like, what are you even saying? There's truth to all rumors. What are you saying, man? Did you want to trade or not? There is nothing that convinces me that this team is going to turn this around because there's a void in leadership. You have a coach who seems non-committal on anything that would maybe address some of these things and make significant changes. A quarterback who is who he is. So what changes? And if you have this window, which I think is the most important thing here, you have a window if you're the Vikings. Most teams have a window. If you're the Patriots, you've got a 20-year window. If you're the Steelers under Roethlisberger, Drew Brees and the Saints, if you have a Hall of Fame quarterback, your window's much wider. But for most teams, your window is 2 to 4 years if you're lucky. And then it comes again maybe a decade later for a lot of teams. This is their window. So if you are not going to progress with the $84 million quarterback and the top receivers you sign, and you're not moving the ball the way you expect it to, what becomes of this franchise? Like, to me, my thing is, what is the move that can be made, Collar? Like, what is the thing that can be done other than firing people? And I'm not advocating firing people. I'm just saying that this is what happens in the NFL. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
what
Yep.
NFL teams do in these situations. And then now you have a team that is no longer just dealing with local embarrassment, Collar. Now you're on First Take, and Stephen A. Smith is saying, "What a joke you are." Now, if you're ownership, you're looking at this and going, "Wow, we're becoming the laughing stock of the NFL." In those situations, NFL teams fire people because they're so concerned about perception. And I feel like that's where we're headed with the